Hey, welcome to Studio 5326. Today we're going to take a look at this Humidor build. So I was fortunate to find some really cool pieces at Woodcraft of some spalted flame maple. As you can see from the tops, all the figure on them. This is what they look like with some finish on them. That's actually a Rubio Monocoat finish. So to get the process started, I took the 1/4 inch thick flame maple and glued it up to some Spanish cedar. To get my stocks to build the humidors. So I used the best pieces for the top and the sides, and I had some curly maple pieces laying around that I used for some of the bottoms. So here you can see I just laminated the maple onto both sides of the Spanish cedar, and now I'm just going to rip it down the middle with the bandsaw here. Again, now that I've got those cut in half, I've just got to get them face joined and planed. And I was going to shoot for a final thickness of 5/8, but I mean, if it was a little bit thicker, that was fine. I was just ideally trying to get them all squared up and all the same thickness. So a few passes on the joiner to face join them, and then a couple passes to edge join them so that I'll be ready to square them all up at the table saw after the planer. Important to note with the figured woods here, I prefer to go ahead and face joint that side because I can control the feed rate and make really light passes, which will give me less tear out than the planer. And then when I use the planer, I put the maple face down and I just planed away the Spanish cedar. So here, a little trick, I'm just getting pencil marks on there. That way when all the pencil marks are gone, I know that I've completely planed that surface. So again, I'm just taking light passes, trying to avoid any tear out. Pretty forgiving with the Spanish cedar if you are going to use the figured woods. Definitely feed it as slow as your machine will let you and take as light of passes as you can. So now that I've got them planed, bring it over to the table saw, and I'm looking to square up the outside edge. Then from there, once I have them all squared up, I'll look and see how much wood I have to work with, and then basically I'm trying to get 2 side pieces out of each one of these boards. So now I've got my side pieces ripped. It's time to cut some trim pieces for the trim here. I'm using some Texas mesquite. So I'm just ripping these at 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch strips. So now I'm just doing a little rough layout of the sides of my box. I'm mainly looking for where the piece is going to end, so when I glue my trim pieces in, I can make sure that the ends of the joint fall in the spot that will be cut away so that I have a seamless trim throughout the box. And I used to do this with just a tape measure, but I tell you what, getting some of these marking measuring tools from woodpeckers definitely makes stuff a lot easier and a lot more accurate. And anytime you're building stuff like this, if you have good setup tools, it makes everything else so much easier. So here I'm just switching out to my dado blade, and you can't see it here, but you can kind of see me adjusting it. I'm using Woodpecker's flip stop for my saw stop table saw. So it's a super fast way to cut accurate dados. So here I'm using my trim to set the height of my blade, and then all you want to do is make sure that your blade thickness is at least half the width of your dado, and then you'll set your left and right limit at your fence and get you a fit just like that. So again, the setup time on this, pretty quick. You know, I'd say it's a fraction of the time where you'd normally go in there and stack your dado blades and your shims to try to get the thickness correct. You know, this one, super simple, pretty intuitive, and once you have that set at that width, you can move it around on your table saw as well. So I just left it set, so when I cut the dado in the inside of the box where the actual bottom will sit, I just move the fence, move my flip stop, and my dado width is already set. So here I'm just laying out the trim pieces, making sure that the end will finish inside those lines right there, those pencil marks. So here you can see how right there that end piece is going to go right in that spot where it's going to be cut away, and that's how you make sure you get seamless trim pieces. So again, the hammer there and the clamp is really just to kind of force it down in there. Probably only leave it there for 10 or 15 minutes and you're good. So run another quick dado just for the on the inside there. That's where the bottom will fit, and then I'm cutting a rabbet around the top, and that's where the lid will fit in. I think the first time I ever tried to build a box, I built the box separate, and then I built the lid, and then trying to match the lid to the box was pretty tough. And I actually found this set of plans on the Wood Whisperer Guild. I built a couple of them, and then I tweaked this one to a different size, changed it up just a little bit. But very good set of plans, very informative, going by step, all your measurements, talks about veneering, cigar history, seasoning your humidor. So I'll leave a link to that in the description if y'all want to check that out. So now that I've got all my joinery, well, the majority of my joinery cut, right now I'm just rough cutting these. So just cutting them out, squaring up the ends, and then cutting that joint right there between the trim pieces. Once that's done, I'll go ahead and set some stops up and cut them to all their final lengths. Once I have the shorter pieces all cut to their lengths, I'll cut a rabbet on the edge, which will be, since my trim is 1/4 by 1/4, I want to leave no more than 1/4 inch of material, and then the depth of my rabbet will be the thickness of whatever the stock is. So I'll use one of the other pieces just to set it up, and then I'm just setting up my stop to get the left and right limits, and then just a few passes back and forth will trim that remaining material. And if it's a little bit rough afterwards, you can always just trim it up with a chisel or a shoulder plane. So pretty happy with that. Now it's just time to cut the bottoms. So a little bit of measuring. Essentially, I just measured the inside of the box, and my dados were 1/4 inch deep, so I just added a little under 1/2 inch just so I have room for some glue. But again, for these, the bottoms and tops, it will be some maple laminated to MDF. This will serve two purposes. It'll be more stable than the wood itself, because the MDF isn't going to expand and contract like solid wood, and it'll give it a little bit more weight to it. Sometimes if you build a solid wood box, it can be just feel light. With this, I mean, it gives it substantial weight. So it just kind of makes it feel like a nice quality product. Although I'm not normally a fan of using MDF, it is useful here, and it'll be covered with the cedar liner on the inside, so it will not be visible. So here, after I've laminated the bottoms on there, I've just trimmed off the excess so that when I flush trim it doesn't grab, so I try to leave, you know, 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch. Got a little starter pin there for safety, and now I'm just using a flush trim bit to flush it all up to that MDF. Yeah, this is one way to do it. Another way, you could obviously just cut your MDF oversized, laminate your hardwood veneer on there, and then trim it to size on the table saw. Would be another option. So now, before I put the bottoms on, I'm going to go ahead and sand these through the grits up to 220, because once they get installed, it will be a little bit difficult to sand that piece. I'm also going ahead and flushing up my trim on these pieces here, so that it rides smooth on the table saw when I go to cut the trim pieces around the top and bottom. Quick blade change out. So here I just use that woodpecker's square to set my 1/4 inch mark from the maple side, and then I just raise my saw blade up to that, make a few passes, and then it's time for a test fit. Right here, anytime you're cutting a rabbet all the way up to the edge, it's a good idea to use a sacrificial fence on your table saw so you don't accidentally saw into your fence. So for the glue up here, it's a good idea to have a rag on hand, get your clamp set up, have everything assembled, and then pull it apart and put it back together. So there, I didn't have video of that one getting glued up, but here it is with the lid getting put on. So a nice tight fit. And then here's a video of smaller box getting glued up. So it's a smaller box, but the process is exactly the same. This is one I gave to my wife. I had extra pieces left over, not enough to build a full one, so while I was at it, I just made this little guy as well, which turned out pretty cool. I actually did a lacquer finish on this one, so you'll see the pictures of it finished at the end. So let me know if you like the look of the lacquer finish or the Rubio Monaco finish better. So here again, I'm cutting a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch rabbet around the top of the box, and then I'll cut a 1/4 inch by 1/8 inch rabbet around the bottom of the box. And those will be for my trim pieces. And the reason why you go shallower on the bottom is so you don't accidentally cut into your joinery that's holding in the bottom of the box. If it's not perfectly flush, a little bit of shoulder planing around that edge, get everything flushed up, and you're ready to put your trim on. Here I think I actually had a couple of little corners that got a little blowout on them, so before I put the trim pieces on, I went ahead and repaired those. So here you can see just that little bit of spot on the corner, so I'm going to just cut it out a little bit bigger so I can get a good glue joint there. Now I'm just looking for a piece that has a good grain match, and then I'll cut the piece off, glue it, let it dry, then I'll use hand tools to flush it up and then install my trim. So little things like this, happen all the time, so just take a little bit of extra time, fix them correctly, and your finished product will look so much better versus trying to use a wood filler to correct it. If it's a small crack, I'll typically make my own wood filler, which you'll see later in the video. I'll use just glue and sawdust or CA glue and sawdust of that, typically out of the exact board I'm using. I'll just go over to my spindle sander, turn the dust collection off, run it, get a little pile of sawdust, and then make a little putty, and then force it in there, and it blends pretty well. Another option, you could always just throw some glue and turn your dust collection off on your orbital sander and sand directly over it, and if it's a small little gap, it'll it'll make that disappear. So now I have my trim pieces, which just sit a little bit proud, and then I'm just using some of this painter's tape. Essentially I'm using it as clamps, and then I went ahead and just put tape around the rest of the box just so the glue squeeze out will stick to the tape. It just makes for an easier cleanup in the end. There's that little piece that I fixed. I'm just flushing it up. So once the tape comes off, our next step will be to cut our corner trim pieces. But before we do that, we'll need to flush everything up so it rides even on the table saw. So I'll just use my hand plane to get it pretty close to the surface. Again, it's pretty figured wood, so it's prone to tearing out. So I try not to go all the way and touch the maple with the hand plane. Just get it close, within a 32nd of an inch, and then I'll use my sander with 120 grit to flush everything up. So again, here I'm looking to cut a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch slot here in the sides, and then I'm gluing up my trim. So this will serve a couple purposes. If you were to do a veneer, then this would definitely protect the edges of the trim. You don't want those edges just sitting out where they could get chipped. With this one, it's not as well, but it does give it a more finished and seamless look. And if you had a little error during glue up where your center trim didn't perfectly line up, this will give it the optical illusion that it is perfectly aligned. So again, those just stick them in there, let them dry, and then use your flush trim saw to flush those off, and then go ahead and patch anything that didn't turn out right. I use this opportunity to go ahead and fill those. Alright, once that's done, you can see there's a tiny little crack right there, so a little bit of sawdust, a little bit of glue, a little bit of sanding, and the little crack is gone. So now I'm just getting a rough sanding up to about 150 grit, going through and just making sure that I've filled any little imperfections in the surface, so that when I go to finish, it's going to look like a good product. So this right here is probably the most stressful part of the entire build, is cutting the lids off. So essentially trying to cut right down the middle of that trim, and then I'm trying to leave about an 1/8 inch of material, and then I'll cut it off with a handsaw, and then I'll use a little block plane to trim off that tab that was left. And I'm trying to be real careful not to touch the rest of the box, since those were cut apart. It makes a perfect joint, so try not to mess up those. So here I'm using the Shaper Origin to cut my mortises for my Brusso hinges. So essentially what I'm doing here is finding my XY axis, and I'm snapping a grid on there so that I can place my file accurately. So essentially, after this one, I think I figured out a better route where I actually snap a grid here on the left side, and I set my spacing at 1/32 of an inch. And the reason I did that is I needed it offset to be centered in that wood. I needed it 3/32 of an inch, so I just made my grid 1/32 and put it on the third line. And then I just snapped a grid on the right side and repeated the process. So this tool definitely makes this a lot more accurate and a lot quicker. I have yet to have, the only time I've had one mess up is when my workpiece moved on me. Other than that, I've never had an issue with cutting one of these, and it is much faster. If you were going to do this by hand, I mean, it would take you, it'd probably take you a couple hours just to get a jig built, and then, cut them all out, whether you're using a drill press, chisels. It's a pretty involved process. I mean, this, you're talking getting a full set of them cut in probably about 5 minutes. And you can see the result here is pretty good. I don't think I could match that by hand in that amount of time. So now to install them, I'm laying the hinges out where I want them, making sure the lid closes the way I want it to, and then I'm using a self-centering bit just to get a little pilot hole. And then I'm getting a drill bit here. I set the depth using a little piece of blue painter's tape, and then I'm drilling all those out. And also, when you order this hardware, it'll come with one screw, which is a stainless steel screw, and that is for actually setting the threads. So I've actually had it where I didn't use that in the past, and I actually drilled too small of a hole, and I've actually broken some of the brass screws off inside a Humidor, and it is a nightmare to get those back out. So, I think it was a 3/32 inch drill bit, but yeah, just refer to the manufacturer's instructions, but follow the instructions, use that set screw, and it goes so much smoother. So here's putting a little finish on them inside and out, using a Rubio monocoat here. I use this on a lot of my projects, a lot of the tables I build. It's a great finish, really does well, preventing any kind of water damage. But you definitely need to do a good job sanding, not skip any grits, because you will see the scratches, because it's not like a lacquer that's going to build on the surface and cover the scratches. So here's a quick look. We saw this at the beginning, but here's how they look after getting that Rubio monocoat finish. So if you like the matte look and the feel on these, it still has that natural wood feel, where the your lacquer polyurethane finishes will have that kind of more plastic feel. So now that those are done, it's time to start making our inner liner out of Spanish cedar. So this is kind of where the magic happens on the Humidor, and what is going to hold the humidity in. So just kind of got them to a little bit manageable size, a little bit oversized. I face jointed a side, and then off that side, you just go ahead and cut those in half. I'm looking for 3/16 thickness, I believe, is what I went with here. So just plenty of material to work with. So just moving through pretty quick here. A few passes on the planer, and I use one of my combination squares. I've got it set at my 3/16, so you'll see me periodically just checking that thickness, and once I'm a little off of it, it's one more pass and then they're done. Go. Looks like I just need one more pass. Got a little bit of material left. Now with these are not going to get any finish, so I'm going to just give them a good sanding with 180 grit, because I do want them to look good. And it's going to be pretty hard to sand them once they're installed, so just give everything a sanding before we cut everything to size. So first I'm just cutting my panels for the top and bottom of the box. Lengthwise, I gave about a 32nd on each side of space, and widthwise, which is where most of your wood movement is going to happen, I gave it 1/8 of an inch on each side. But that gap will be covered by the side pieces of the liner. So here, this table saw sled Man, it took me a few hours to build it, but man, this is one of my most used jigs. Very accurate for all this. I bought the T-Track fence from Rockler. I mean, it's okay. My one complaint is the flip stop on it is kind of a pain to use. It doesn't really work great. I've used Incra ones in the past, which are super accurate, but most of the time I just end up using a piece of wood and a clamp like you see there. Got those pieces. Now I'm just trimming my side pieces to fit. Coming up, just sneaking up on that cut. Again, I want it to be as tight a joint as possible. And then once you're doing this, you want to make sure you've got a damp rag so you can wipe out all the glue squeeze out. And another little trick I use is I'll take one of my chisels and turn it backwards and rub it along those rub it along where the pieces meet, and then just wipe it off on my rag. That's a good way to get all the glue out, because once this glue dries, it's going to be tough to get to, and you'll end up damaging your piece. So a couple little clamps just to hold that joint tight, so I get a good seal when the box closes. And take a look. Again, you don't see the MDF inside at all. Nice little Spanish cedar liner, and that lip right there is going to create the airtight seal whenever it goes into the bottom of the box. So now I'm doing the bottom of the box. I just need to cut I've got my bottom there, so I just need my side panels, and I just have to account for the lip that's coming in from the lid needs to be going down inside the box, so I just have to account for that. Other than that, the process is essentially the same. So because I did already pre-finish inside the box, which you definitely want to do because you don't want mold and things like that to grow in the box, I'm just going to sand off a few little spots to put some glue, and then I'll slightly scuff a few spots in behind where the other, that way I get good adherence with the glue. Again, I just snuck up on these cuts. I want them to fit as snug as possible, so that clamps aren't really necessary. And again, my side pieces here, those push the other pieces side, so that just wedges everything in there. And again, making sure I've got my wet rag to go in and clean up all that glue squeeze out. Definitely do not skip this step, or you will add hours of work to your project. Alright, so that actually, the lids fit on there perfect, but that's if they're coming straight down. Since you've got hinges on, they're coming at an angle. A little bit of work with the shoulder plane, trimming some of the material. It took me a couple iterations of putting the lid on, taking it off to get it where I wanted. So there we go, pretty happy with that. It's pretty good. And here's a few shots of how they look all finished. And these ones here have the Rubio monocoat finish. Again, I love the figure of this quilted flame maple. So yeah, thanks for watching the video. There'll be a few more shots of the finished stuff. If you liked it, throw a like. If you want to build this video, go check out the Wood Whisperer Guild. I think they still have plans for this build. Well, it'll be a different humidor, a little bit bigger, but you can modify it. And here's that smaller little baby humidor I did with the lacquer finish. You definitely a little bit more sheen with the lacquer. I think I just buffed that out to a kind of semi-gloss satin.
Kind of cool. Maybe I could erase the moment you walk in.
Airtight.